Nancy Kline's book, The Promise That Changes Everything, which is that I won't interrupt you, is challenging to say the least. I'm going to give a broad overview of my thoughts specifically around interruptions in the context of coaching in a thinking environment. Now, there's already quite a bit to take in there because coaching in a thinking environment isn't a conventional place. It's about the encouragement that we give to those we work with, typically one-to-one, to think, not just to speak. And I think as a coach and as someone who has called himself that in various guises for nearly 40 years, I am starting to recognize in myself, at least, I'll go no further than that, that there are many times that I have been driven by my own ego, my own desire to demonstrate how clever and important I am and what I know, and also out of just blind ignorance of not understanding the importance of getting the client to think, that I've distracted thinking, that I've intervened when I shouldn't have done. So, okay, I don't want to make this a self-flagellation thing, but I think a lot of coaches, because I don't think it's just me, could do much more to encourage people to think. So Nancy's statement, one of many, is how far can the thinker go? In other words, the client, in the context of a coaching relationship, how far can the thinker go in their own thinking before they need mine? No, how about that? That would challenge a lot of people, myself included. And for me, that means, do we allow the space for those we work with to think? Are we sufficiently comfortable with silence? Are we creating silence? Are we encouraging silence often enough? No, before we go further, would you like to think further about that? Are you sure you're ready to go further with this? Do you need more thinking time? I don't say that, and I should, and I will. I think we're good at questioning. We're good at running a conversation that we believe is in the interests of the client. Maybe we're not as good at that as we think we are, because encouraging talking is sometimes to the detriment of thinking. So there's a lot in this. So let's have a look at some of this, because it really is challenging stuff. So some time ago, many years ago, I put this slide together that I'll just run through quickly. These aren't definitive thoughts. These are just some of my own. And I'm quite pleased in a way that I've been locked into some of this, because yes, these issues occurred to me many years before. So ignorance is one reason we interrupt. Some people are just straightforward ignorant, impolite, bad-mannered, can't stop themselves. End of story. Then we get a bit more sophisticated. Another reason we interrupt is very often for what we believe to be the good reason, that we're over-enthusiastic, we're over-eager. We like so much what the other person's saying that we want to get in there and help and give a point of view that very often is just unhelpful and distracting. Or we can't hold back because of the opposite. Well, I don't think you're right. Or I think that's wrong. Or it's not what I've seen you do, whatever it is. In both cases, should we? I don't think we should anything like as often as we do. This is another one that I'm prone to. If I don't say this now, I'll forget it. Well, write it down. Write it down and say you're writing down something. And by the way, you might never get round to saying it, because you might deem it more important that you bin that and simply give your client thinking time. That should be enough more often than we think. Poor timing. This is a conversational thing with me. Oh, sorry, I thought you finished. So that can happen as well. The key thing is there are reasons for interruption. We need to understand what they are. And for those which are particularly unhelpful, do less of them. Desire to end conversation and do something else. Okay, well, that's all very interesting. Oh, anyway, that's a classic one, isn't it? Every time someone says to me on the phone, anyway, I know it's some end of conversation. That's so bad in a coaching context. We should not ever do it. We ought to be sufficiently client-centered as to never give the indication, never mind the absolute signal, that we want to do something more important than what we're engaged in. Nearly there. Duration and or content. Some people talk too much. I talk too much. I have to really work hard at focusing on what someone else is likely to be interested in, and on talking for less than I used to at a time. So in other words, you can usually tell someone who recognizes that they talk too much because they talk quick, because they know They need to squeeze in what they've got to say as quickly as possible, because otherwise someone's not going to be listening to it or won't bear with it. So forget it. They're probably not interested enough to even to give you that time, so don't bother. But that's different in coaching. When we are focused on what someone's saying, it isn't always the most interesting thing to us, let's be honest. It isn't always something which is riveting, but it's something that should matter to us, because our role is to actually be focused on, and Nancy Kline says, to be interested in, respect, and fascinated by the speaker. So there you go. I've moved on then to manner of and feelings about the speaker. Well, sometimes people don't help themselves, we would say. Sometimes we don't always like the other person as much as we'd like. Is it easier to not interrupt someone you like against someone you don't? Is it something you've got to work consciously on? I suspect. I told you this would be a short overview. So recognizing that in a coaching context, coaching in a thinking environment, it's all about providing thinking time. It's all about minimizing the coach's interruptions, which are more often a distraction to the other person's thinking than a help to them. What is the case for interrupting? It's nothing like as strong as you might have believed it was. We might think, oh, well, I've got to say this because I'm so wise, I can throw a bit of wisdom in here. It usually doesn't help. Oh, well, I'll throw in an experience of mine, an anecdote. Don't do that. It's probably not going to be helpful. Is it so important that you say what you feel you should, as opposed to thinking, what does the other party need, when very often what they need is more time to think, more time to prepare what they have to say, if only for themselves, if not for you. They're not interested in a lot of what you might say as the coach. They're really not. They want to talk about themselves. They want to explore their own issues. And the coach's role really should be about providing thinking time, not just speaking time, and looking and appearing and being relaxed as they do that, rather than, I'm about to say something, look at my face. This is the face that says, I'm going to interrupt you any minute. Don't do those things. We've really got to say to ourselves, what is the case for interrupting? If I interrupt now, would it be helpful? It's probably not. And a listening model I like a lot is, wait, why am I talking? Why am I talking? We talk too much in a typical coaching contact. Talk less, encourage more. Be prepared to park what you might have said that could have been helpful, to give the time that the other person needs to think. And I mean to think. Prepare thoughts, not just speak. So it's not just a conversation, it's what goes on behind the conversation, behind the words. It's the thinking the client is encouraged to do that no one else gives them that space. So the case for interrupting, Nancy will say, if someone in the judgment of the coach is likely to harm themselves, to be unhelpfully critical, to in some way cause themselves some distress. Again, that's a judgment call, isn't it? For me, the most important thing is to question constantly why we're interrupting. Speak when you're invited to by the other party. Don't presume that what we've got to say, particularly when we interrupt, is more important than the thinking time that we're preventing in the other party. These are first thoughts. I haven't even started the book yet. I've glanced through it. It's so good. So for me, I'm going to try and start to do some of this stuff. It's not easy. I encourage others to simply answer that question. What is the case for interrupting? There's where to find the stuff I'm generated around this in all sorts of forms. And if you find that helpful, well, let me know. It's always nice to know what people find useful. And if you don't, let me know that too. Maybe it'll help me focus on the things which are of most use to people. So anyway, I could have gone on. I've gone on further than I thought I would, but I think the most important issues have been covered for me. I hope you found that helpful.